Hey guys, Thomas Cicely Jr. here, aka Mustached, here to review The Equalizer 2, featuring Denzel Washington as Mr. McCaw, or Robert McCaw. I have not seen the first Equalizer, or The Equalizer, so I actually don't know what the setup to, or the previous movie to this actually is all about. But nonetheless, I decided to jump into the sequel and just sort of take the review from there. So this is a fresh review without knowing what, if there's any stuff about what happens in the first movie, I'm just not gonna know what that stuff is, unfortunately. Anyways, getting into the review, it starts with our main character, Mr. McCaw, on a train in disguise, ordering up some drinks, talking to these bad guys, and once they kind of slip up, he starts to attack them, seeing what they're going to do in his mind's eye, or whatever you want to call that, and is able to essentially take them out. So we cut away to him being a taxi driver, or just a normal driver that lifts people to different locations, and we get to see him do that a little bit here and there, driving different people to different places. It goes on for just a little bit. So we see that when he drives a particular woman to this place, and the people who don't know who she was, is all like, oh, you got her drunk or whatever. That's when someone is wronged, he will usually come in and settle it via killing people, and that's exactly what he does. So, in that way, he does his little bit. He takes the people out. He sees the drugs that they were doing anyways. And once he's almost done, or just about done, he resets his little digital clock. I guess it's some sort of indicator for his own pleasure. It's not really ever explained why he does it in this movie. I assume that must be something explained in the first movie. And then he talks to this woman that he knows, apparently named Susan, and again, I assume that's someone from the first movie that he just worked with. So she suggests that he go home, but he's not set up for that, as his wife apparently died. Again, I don't know if that's something that happened in the first movie, and he's also pretty well known in his little community. Talking to this guy named Miles, who does have this sort of side plot that we'll get to in just a moment. But he offers to clear this graffiti that was left in his little hometown, so he's doing that in the meantime. So Susan gets to work calling this other guy, Dave, from the agency, and it already is pretty obvious where it's gonna go from there. But we'll get to that in just a moment as well. So, anyways, or I should say McCaw, or Robert, talks to this old guy about stuff for a bit. Then he goes back to Miles, seeing that he's already going at work at that painting, or clearing it anyways. And Susan then arrives at the scene of the murder that we see happen in between, where this wife died and this other guy was also shot as well. So there's that also going on. But as Susan is investigating, she is soon attacked by these two guys, and she tries to fight them off, but they take her into this room, and it's assumed that they kill her at this point in time. So we cut back to Miles, who's already nearly finished with this wall, and he talks with Dan a bit more, who gets a call about what happened. And he starts to move to the location, and he talks to the husband about what happened. And he works at this little chip that's on this phone that I guess was either left behind or something, or rather. So then it cuts to this party scene and apparently the guys that were responsible were set up by these other guys, and it kind of coverts into this other mission from there. So, anyways, Dan looks at the footage more carefully about Susan's body, seeing how the guys with the bags that she got in the elevator with pressed the button so that they would know her location and so on. Then he talks to one of his coworker. I don't know if it was Dave or not, but he talks to him about the explosion, and then about the video as well. So we cut to then Dan kind of going towards the side plot, and the movie kind of rails off from here, going with Miles, and who went off to go join this crew. So he follows them, and then in the meantime he calls Dave, and he kind of waits there, and then sees that Miles hasn't returned. So he goes out to the this gangster location to find out, after taking 2 guns, that Miles was with them, with this little crew. So Dan pulls him out. Sorry, I keep saying Dan because that's what I wrote in my notes. Because Denzel Washington, I just called him Dan in my notes, even though his name is McCaw, or Robert McCaw, anyways. So I do apologize if I do that a bit. Anyway, regardless, he takes Miles out of that location and gives him the gun and points it at himself, saying, if you really want to be a killer, then you might as well start with me. Again, it is a pretty interesting scene for, again, a side plot, but I do think it does just distract from the main story that's kind of going on here. Anyways, so Miles talks to Dan about stuff, cooking, pretty basic stuff in his house, and he goes, he kind of the movie kind of just derails again, going with McCaw going back to being a driver for a bit, for at least a scene. But he does see this one guy who kind of drives and doesn't say anything, and even though he purposely goes in the wrong direction, he sees that this guy isn't saying anything, and then he figures out that this guy's trying to kill him, and so he starts to attack him, and McCaw kills this guy. So, anyways, we go to see that Dave has this sort of man watching him, and we see that it is actually just McCaw waiting. And he plugs in the phone that he had from earlier, and he slides another phone, I forget if it's the same phone or a different phone, and he calls that phone with his phone, only to find out that it actually rings, indicating that it was Robert who sent these people to kill Susan. Sorry, Robert's his name. Dave is his name. Oh my god, I'm getting all the names mixed up right now. Dave is the one who is responsible for killing Susan, and he goes out, he kind of talks to, that being McCall, talks to this Dave guy about potentially killing him, and he kind of actually just goes outside with all these other killers, but they're just standing around as the family's still there, and he kind of goes out with Dave's family there. So he kind of warned them and then went off with Dave's family. So he quickly talks to this other guy who ended up being with some loose end. I don't know what that scene was all about. I don't remember this guy at any other point in the movie, but whatever. So Dave arrives at Dan's house, and he's looking for, of course, McCaw. And I said Dan's house, didn't I? I meant McCaw's house. Oh my goodness. Anyway, was still in that house, so he gets instructions to hide from these two killers that are clearly out to kill McCaw. And Miles manages to get out after a bit, but then the two potential killers, get him, and then they use him as potential bait or whatever. So McCaw returns home, even though has been this storm building up, and the storm is even worse where he was living. So he makes his way over there, and then Dave and he gets his little team that we saw, and probably even a few more guys with them, to go potentially hunt down McCaw. So we go to this place, and Dave takes the high ground while the rest of his crew goes out and tries to find him and kills. And the killing begins as McCaw sets up one of the houses to trap one of them. He kills one of the guys next to the ocean. He does another guy in the other house, blowing it up. And while he's moving about, he already knows Dave's location, so he's like shooting at him, near him at the very most. And he's like trying to stay on the roof while McCall is moving about. But he starts to try to shoot at Miles, who is left in this car. Then he's suddenly tripped somehow. I'm not sure how that ended up happening. It was very unclear. But nonetheless, he ends up put on the roof where they fight each other. And then, of course, McCaw clearly wins, saves Miles. And then Miles is all like, who are you anyway? Like, who are you really? And then it cuts to him on the bus talking to this lady who's interested in the art he is doing. And then that is the end of the Equalizer 2. So, your pretty standard action movie. I do feel like it does get a bit distracted by a side plot here. Other than that, it's pretty generic. It doesn't, it's your pretty generic action movie, so, I think I'd give it a 6 out of 10, because, again, it does get a little bit distracted from what it was doing. There are a few things that just felt unfinished, or, there was one guy mentioned that just sort of feels like his bit is, unmentioned or whatever. But other than that, it is what it is, and it's okay. And that is my review of The Equalizer 2, and if you enjoyed this short review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out that link in the description. I'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.